All right, looks like we are back at it. Just waiting to make sure everything pops up appropriately on YouTube. There we go. All right, so again, I'm making several videos in one day, and then about 2 days ago, one video I did the entire video, didn't record at all, even though I told it to beforehand. Minorly problematic. So I'm just going to be periodically checking in just to make sure this doesn't happen again. So we'll see and we'll go from there. So I'm just going to hide OBS right now and we'll get to it. So this video right here is a follow-up to what I did previously, which was being able to move sprites around the canvas in P5. What I'm going to do now is set up a way for sprites to interact with other sprites instead of the user. So before I jump into that, I do just want to point out in the description of the video down below, there's a few things. One is a link to this sketch that I will be building in the video. It's starting out, it's the exact same one that I left off on in the last video, if you're watching all of these in order. I've also got a link to some of the P5 reference materials. I may periodically refer to them. For this one, I'll probably be talking about sprites and groups, and we'll go from there and all of that. So I'm going to just jump into it, but I do want to point out that, again, this sketch already has P5 Play loaded into the sketch. I'm not going to go through how to load that in, but there is a link in the description that gives you the HTML code you need to do that. So check that out if you need to, because again, if you're doing this on your own and you don't have the P5 Play library loaded in, none of this is going to work. So you're going to need to do that. I've put a few videos out already, so I'm not going to jump into that. All right, let's just jump right into it. So again, just as a quick refresher, I have this sketch right here that I can move my sprite around using the W, A, S, and D keys of the keyboard. I can also bring it back to the middle by pressing the Enter key, and there we go. And if I click on the sprite, it will spin around and then die. There we go. So yeah, I'll slow down the spinning and I'll make it disappear faster. There we go. So I've got that all there. I'm not going to go through all of this stuff again. Just know that it is there. So what I want to do is set up additional sprites for our player sprite, my sprite here, to be able to interact with in certain ways. So I'm going to do that right now. So let's say I'm going to make 2 different groups of sprites, and then we're going to let the sprite interact, this player one, interact with them differently. So let's say I'm going to use SG for sprite group 1 and sprite group 2. It's going to be pretty simple like that. Also, I'm going to make my canvas bigger so we have more room to work with. And I'm going to make my sprite smaller so we have, again, more room to work with. So again, I'll still be able to do all of the things, but it's, you know, just more room to work. So what I'm going to do is in my setup function, I'm going to make some room. We're going to add in a for loop. I'm going to make a total of 20 sprites, and that's what I'm going to use this for loop for. So I'll say let I is assigned 0, I is going to be less than 20, I is going to increase by 1 every time. So what I can say, I need to say SG1 script, and I also need to have one more variable, and this will be the enemies. It will pretend this is a game. We don't have any images put on the sprites yet. That'll be the next video, but we'll put the enemies will be the name of this sprite. So we can say enemy just like before, it's going to be create Sprite. And boop. And where I want this to be, I want this to be randomly on the screen. So we'll say random up. We'll put this not all the way to the edge, but almost there. So we'll say, 10 and width minus 10 for the Y position. We'll put that at a random spot in between, again, 10 and height minus 10. And I'll make these sprites, I'll make them wide. So we'll say, 75 wide, 10 tall. There we are. And then we'll say enemy dot shape color. We'll set that to be red. Red is fairly threatening in the natural world. So we'll, 255, 0, 0. And there they are. So that's the first step. I've just made a bunch of sprites and just put them randomly on the screen. But I want to put them into two different sprite groups. So in order to do that, I'm going to add a conditional into here that's going to just go back and forth and put sprites in one group or the other. So I'll say if I modulo 2 is equal to 0, then we'll say we're going to add these to the group. So sprite group 1 dot add. I'm going to add in enemy else sprite group 2 dot add enemy. Now, I've gone a little out of order here, I realized as I was typing. So I haven't actually made this as a group yet. So in order to do that, we need to, make these a group. So I'm going to go, you have to do this before you add things to the group. So I'll say just SG1 is going to be a new instance of a group. And so is SG2. It's going to be a new group with a capital G. There we go. So you have to make it as a group of sprites, and then you can add things to that group. I can tidy it up. I can rerun it. It doesn't look any different, but now half of these red sprites are in group 1, half are in group 2. And in fact, I'm going to change this up just a bit so we can actually tell which ones are which. So we'll say, we'll make the red ones in group 1, and we'll put, we'll make these ones here green. 0, 25. There. So now the green ones are in group 2, the red ones are in group 1. Should be pretty straightforward. So now we can do a few things. So you'll notice, I'm going to start first and just do a little bit of group interaction stuff. So what a group is we've essentially taken all of these sprites and essentially put them in a single array. And like an array, we can talk to everything in it at once or just individual sprites. And this is where it becomes very useful. Imagine if you were in a classroom and the teacher says, hey, everyone in the class turn to page 57 in your book. It's talking to everyone in the class, or they could say, hey, Billy, pass out these papers to everyone, or specifically talking to a specific student in the class instead of everyone. So that's, again, another way to think about it. But one thing I want to do here is I want to make it so that these sprites on the screen don't move, specifically these enemy ones. So we'll say enemy dot, so we only need to do this once. So we can just do this before we put everything there. We can say enemy dot removable is set to true. And there we go. That should make it so that these don't move around. But if we were to move our sprite around, you notice they're overlapping with each other. Nothing happens. I mentioned in my last video that sprites all have a hitbox around them, so it's able to tell when it overlaps with another sprite or the mouse. So the sprites can tell, and it's setting certain values to true and false, but it's not responding to it in any way. So we need to set that up to happen. So what we can do are add in certain collision responses right here, and we can find some of them in Sprite. There's a lot of stuff, bounce, collide, things like that, but a lot of them are also in groups. And I like looking at these in group just because there's less stuff here, but this is everything you can tell a group to do. So let's pull one up. Let me go into here, and I'll say enemy.displace. Actually, no, that won't work. Let me reorder some stuff here. Copy that. We'll go after we've added it to the group, so we can say SG1. We're talking to the group dot displace everything in SG1. 1 dot displace everything in SG2. Now, if I run this, you should notice that these greens, why is that still overlapping? Rather, it's the red ones. Okay, so now none of these red ones are overlapping with each other. I don't know why some of these are still overlapping with the greens. Well, let's just do it this way. We'll say SG2. I can type. All right, so let's run this again. So ideally, assuming everything works, we are now displacing the sprites. So what displace does is that whenever two sprites overlap with each other, it's going to move the sprites to the closest position to where they are no longer overlapping. You'll notice a few of these are right up against each other, but they aren't technically overlapping anymore. So we have that there. If we want to keep things from not moving, we can then just say, we can just go in and make them immovable. But I'm going to leave them like this for now, and we'll come back to that in a second. But actually, can we set that? We can't set that on that level, but I'll come back to that. But for right now, just know that these sprites, while they can butt up right against each other, they won't overlap. And that's one of the collision methods we can use. Another one we can use, I'm going to get rid of this console.log just so it's out of the way. But another one we can use, let's go in and say my sprite. That is the blue sprite here. We can say dot bounce. I like bounce off of SG2. So this sprite will now bounce off of the green sprites. So if I run this again, we can run this around and boing, 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 boing. So it's bouncing and it's actually moving the other sprites out of the way. I don't really think I want that to happen. What if I just said, let's see if I can set it up here. enemy dot immovable is equal to true. As you might expect, that makes the sprite unable to move, but that happens before we set the displacement checks. So here's what I'll do. I'm going to reorder these just a little bit. So I'll put this here, put that there, and then we'll say it in here, enemy dot immovable is equal to true. There. So again, unfortunately we can't tell the whole group to be immovable at once. That would be nice. We have to talk to it on the sprite level. So that's just a slightly annoying thing. I'm just going to check. Hey, it looks like it's still going. So now if I rerun this, what should happen is now the player sprite should bounce off of the green sprites, but the green sprites shouldn't move. Boing, 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 boing. I've effectively made a wall that our sprite bounces off of. Boing, boing, boing. And still nothing is happening with the red sprites, but the computer is checking, and every time it detects that the player sprite has come into contact with any sprite inside of sprite group 2, again, greens, then it will bounce it off, and that is essentially just making it move in the opposite direction. You can check out some of the the details of bounce and things like that. But let's do another one just real quick. That's the reason I did 2 different sprites here. So let's go in and say my sprite dot collide. We want to check and see if it's colliding with sprite group 1, the red sprites, and I'll put that. I run this. Now, we're bouncing off the green ones, and we'll just boom, boom, hit the red ones. Boing, boing, boing. We're bouncing off of there. There's a little more overlapping than I would like with these sprites. I don't know why that's happening, but I'm not going to focus on it too much. Anyways, we have that right there, but that's great and all. I mean, this could be effective. It's a great way for setting up walls in your code. So maybe if you wanted to keep everything on the canvas, that's a great way to do that. We'll kind of end the video with that. But you can build mazes and things so your sprites can't cut through, or maybe an obstacle that they get repelled from. You can play around with this quite a lot. But where this becomes even more powerful is with the idea of a callback function. If you were to look in the reference material, again linked in the description, you'll notice that we can also set something called a callback for most of these, really all of these interactions right here. So in order to do that, we have to first make a function. So a callback is just a function that we're going to call at a later time. So function spin me. All right. So we'll say that on this, I'll say my sprite dot rotation plus equals 45. All right. So now what should happen is anytime we call this function, we can set it up to essentially rotate this sprite by 45 degrees. In order to do that, we have to set up as an argument here in our functions here, we can just give the name, so spin me. Unlike you may have done in the past, whenever you refer to a function, you need the parentheses right here in JavaScript. You do not want them right here. You'll run into bugs and errors this way. The reason for that is we are essentially just storing the name of the function to be called later. If you were to type in the parentheses, the computer would try to execute that function right then and there at that point, but we just want to save it in the memory, so that way whenever we do bounce, we execute this function. So if I run this around, we should, when I move into a green sprite, boing, it starts spinning. Boing, and it'll do it like that, and it goes back to the initial one. So maybe I could just say equals 45. Boing, and now it's bounced. And now it's set there. But we could maybe get this a little bit different. So we could say 45. Or I need to let spin equal 40. Yeah, I'm not going to get too into it. I'll make this global so that way it exists. But we should. I just want it to rotate a little bit and not go back. Anyway, we'll set that there. I'm gonna stop leaving it on that, but you can fine tune however you want this function to work. So again, maybe you want your character to bounce back, spin around, change an animation. It can be whatever you really want it to be. You can customize it in any of these callback functions for specific unique interactions that can be anything. That's what I want to stress right here. And I don't know why these are overlapping. That bothers me. But anyways, so we should be displacing them before they're there. Oh, I get it. It's because we haven't added them all to the groups yet. You know what? It's close enough. We're getting some errors because we haven't put all the sprites in the groups, and it's getting annoying. But we'll get by. I don't feel like fixing that right now. So let's do into this final one. I'm going to make another one right here. Function game over. And it's just going to be another callback function. Like that's supposed to say my sprite dot life equals 10 frames. So now we can, whenever we collide with the red sprites right here, we can just say that's game over. And now, there we are. That seed randomly put a sprite right there, so we gamed over immediately. There we are. So now we can bounce off of these green ones. You can tell we've already bounced because we've offset it a little bit. But if I touch these sprites, we go right there. You'll notice that every frame it's detecting that we collide with the sprite, that it's resetting that count. So maybe you don't want collide, maybe you want bounce as well. And we can set this one to collide. So now if I can bump into these, boing, there we are, but I can bounce, boom, and then we die. Maybe that would be a more useful thing. I'm going to change this up. So instead of spin me, I'm going to name this something a little more accurate. Collect. And we'll say, we're going to figure this out. This dot life equals 10. And then we'll say, because we want to talk to this sprite specifically that we're colliding with. And then we'll say score plus plus. We want to increase the score. And we'll just put score on the kit. So I'm making a very basic game. So here's the score, and I want to set this back to collect. So we're going to find out. All right. There we are. So we've got a few things. So instead of this dot there, we'll say who dot collide with my sprite. Again, you have to kind of finesse exactly what's colliding with what, but the goal is to collect the sprites. And again, that sprite overlapped with 7 frames. So again, maybe instead of collide, you want bounce. And then now, boing, again, in it. Why isn't that bouncing? It should be bouncing. Well, we'll again, I'll fine tune it. This is just me kind of doing something on the fly. So I'm going to set that back to my sprite dot bounce. So now we get going down. There we go. That's what I was expecting to happen, but the wrong thing in there. So collect, and we'll fine tune it all. But again, you can specify all of these things. So maybe instead of this dot life, I'll just remove that for the sake of this because I'm going to spend forever working out the details and it won't work. This is going to be a very bad game, but boing, every time you bounce on the green ones, you get a point. Boing, boing, boing. But every time you hit a red one, boing, your character dies. So that's that. But you can fine tune all of them, and you can specify exactly how you want the various interactions to go. And again, we can look at this right here. Again, the target and the callback, but it looks like it puts in Sprite A, Sprite B. So if I did, I'm learning stuff too right now. Collect. There we go. Okay, so basically I just added some arguments right here. The first one is essentially the object that is getting, that we're checking, and the second is what it collided with. So my sprite is the sprite, as sprite group 2 is that specific sprite. So now by adding this into right here, I can make it so that way we boing boing collect the prize sprites, but there's only so many to collect. We can have that there. We can make, and then I touch the red one, game over. And then we could say, maybe over here, if this is one more thing with groups, if sprite group 2 dot length is less than 1, we'll run the setup function again. That's if it's greater than 1. Now, ideally I should boop, boop. I'm just going to collect all these sprites. Eight, 9, 10, and we got some more. Again, it could work, could not. You can fine tune yours. I'm gonna leave it at here. That's not what I wanted to do. I wanted to save this one. There we go. So that's where I'm gonna leave it off here. Again, you can work with these in groups, and that's how I tend to do it, or you can do it individually on the sprite level if you don't have full-on groups of sprites. But you basically just make the sprites and then make the groups. So you have to make the group, and then you have to add the sprites to the group. So again, you're talking to the group and adding the sprite. From there, you can talk to the groups as a whole. So again, I'm saying, my sprite's going to bounce off of sprite group 2. I'm going to run the collect callback function. And we're also going to have it bounce off of sprite group 1. And we're going to run the game over function. And then if we collected enough, we'll run setup again to put more on there, but it gets iffy because it re-randomizes everything. Either way, we have that all happening right there. And again, these are usually pretty short, simple functions, but they can be, any kind of customizable depending on what you want. So I hope this was helpful for you all. If you learned something or enjoyed the video, please give it a like, consider subscribing. It does help out a lot. Otherwise, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comment. I love kind of answering community questions, helping people out with that. And we'll go from there. My next video, I'm going to be kind of playing with adding some animations and how the sprites look on the screen. So stay tuned for that. I'll be doing that a little bit later today. Or if you're watching this in the future, that's kind of irrelevant. You can just kind of check it down below. But anyways, that's going to be it for this. I'm going to pull up OBS, and that's going to end it for me.